Welcome to The Professor and the Coach. These are going to be a set of conversations with Professor of Leadership at Henley Business School David Pendleton and myself, Master Coach Guy Bloom. David and I met on an earlier episode of the Leadership Bites podcast. We got on absolutely famously and then started to have conversations that we suddenly thought we should probably be recording and putting out there. So that's exactly what we've done. David and I will be picking up on topics connected to leadership and things that are current in the media that we feel are relevant for a conversation. So on that note, enjoy the episode. Hi, David.
Well, hi. How you doing?
I am good. I'm caffeined up and all that kind of stuff. So I'm ready to rock and roll. I recognise I don't have my notepad ready, so I've got to sort that out. But good to see you.
Apropos of that, I came across a quote from David Letterman that said, before his first cup of coffee in the morning, he had no discernible personality whatsoever.
Sometimes I'm like that. All right. I've come to the conclusion I'm not addicted to coffee because I can actually go without it. You know, like when I've been away for a couple of weeks.
For minutes on end, you mean?
No, I can just go 2 weeks as I've done it, but I just really like it. I'm just, but that's what addict. It's not a problem. I just really like it.
Addict.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Oh, gold. But anyway, so listen, we set ourselves a bit of a, when we started doing these things, we said we'd come at this from a position of dealing with things that were, good discussion topics. And then we would react to things from time to time in the news. And you raised on our last recording this, how far do we want to go? How deep do we want to go? How tangible do we want to make our reflections? And it's not so much that we've come at this from an academic perspective, but it's been more of a discussion point, and we've leaned into things that might be going on around us. But I think this is a topic that we want to bring to the table that is very real in the news right now. And, again, unscripted, but just our thoughts, reactions to the situation in Afghanistan. And I think that's something that, we thought is a trial for us to see how it plays out as a conversation, but also something that's not just topical, but is, I'm going to use the word serious for want of a better word.
The other rationale in a sense is you and I are both completely embroiled in the issue of leadership. And we often think about it as, leading teams or leading organizations or leading departments or whatever it may be. But, leading nations, leading the world is in our ambit still. And I don't know about you, but I am troubled by what I see unfolding in Afghanistan at the moment and at Kabul airport. What we have in a nutshell is a nation that for 20 years has been embroiled in what is variously called a war or an occupation or whatever it may be. But now that has been decided to come to an end very abruptly, it's causing mayhem. And the hope, of course, is that mayhem is only short-lived. But boy, it's intensely painful in that time. But I don't know about you, but I personally feel troubled by this. I feel troubled by it on lots of levels. I mean, not least because what seems to be happening feels to me to be breaking all of the rules of good leadership. And the second thing is, it is jeopardizing trust. And I'm a trustee of a charity, and if anything was going to be jeopardizing the reputation or trust in that charity, we'd have to report it to the Charity Commission. Nations don't have to do that, but they do have to live with the consequences. And thirdly, at a human level, I feel completely helpless to do anything about it. But I would like to talk it through.
Yeah, and we actually did discuss, is this topic heading going to be values, which will lead us to Afghanistan? And I actually thought, do you know what, let's just say that's in essence what we want to talk about. And that leads to, I think, three things that I noticed. Trust is, I think, something we need to understand. I've also got competence, because that's relevant. And when I think about leadership, all the espousals, all the inspirational, conversations in the world, but if it doesn't sit underpinned by competence, then to some regard, I disregard your leadership cry to, join the fray, because I go, listen, my friend, if you can't even get the basics right, then that's a difficult thing to swallow. And then underpinning that, or part of that, is, as we were discussing, is values. What are we seeing in there that is it a breach of values, as in some people are just not worth trying to save? Is it a breach of competence? We just didn't have a communication strategy in place to get people out. Is it about trust, as in, we had a relationship with certain people in this country that has been built up for over a decade, and are we just walking away with it because they're not, inverted commas, American?
Well, let me put that picture together, if I may.
Of course.
For me, trust has got four elements. We've talked about this briefly on an earlier podcast, but for me, competence is a part of the trust equation. It's really hard to trust someone or somebody which is not competent. Secondly is care. They need to care about something other than just themselves. Thirdly is consistency. Is the way they were yesterday a reasonable guide to how they're going to be tomorrow? And the final one is courage, which means, are they prepared to stand up and be counted when things are tough? Now, when I think about how nations are likely to look at what's happened in Afghanistan, my feeling is that some of those tests have failed quite badly. You mentioned competence. A number of former senior soldiers have come onto the media recently in the UK and said, look, if we'd been charged with getting all of our people out, we could do it. We could have done it extremely easily, particularly when we were running most of the country, or occupied most of the country, and we had a kind of cordon sanitaire around Kabul.
Would have done a staggered exit.
But what it would have required is, tell us that we're going to withdraw. Don't put a false deadline on it, and if you do, make it some way hence, some distance into the future. But ideally, don't put a deadline on it until we've started this evacuation, until we've started to get out some of the key people, until at least we've put the plan in place to get those people out. So the competence issue, I think we failed the trust test, firstly, on competence. If anyone knew that they were going to pull the plug, they should have thought about, how do we make sure that the damage is minimized, and put that plan in place. The senior military folks have been saying very publicly, we could have done that very easily, but not in the timescales that have been imposed upon us. Secondly, care. If you remember, the reason that 2 decades ago the Allied forces went into Afghanistan was because there's 2 reasons. One is we care about ourselves and we want to prevent that country being a sort of hotbed of apprenticeship for terrorists. But the second thing is we also care about, for example, girls and their education, the role of women in society, and so on. And we have a need. We feel that we can bring about both of those ends, preventing terrorism in our neck of the woods by stopping it there, but also we can do some good things for nation building in that country. The third is consistency. Well, for 2 decades we've been saying one set of things, and now we're saying something quite different. So I think it fails that test. I don't doubt courage. I don't doubt at all that the people involved in Afghanistan on the Allied side are hugely courageous. I also don't doubt it, incidentally, on the part of the Taliban. I think they're pretty courageous as well. But the point is, I think that those first 3 trust tests might well be being failed before our very eyes.
And when I look at courage, I think the courage of people that have never had, the phrase, boots on the ground, have never been at the pointy end of the spear. I think courage is an interesting thing, because the courage to ask others, what should I be doing? The courage to maybe take a little bit of time to understand. Sometimes you've got to have the courage to make a quick decision, and sometimes you've got to have the courage to delay a decision. The courage to maybe say, the reaction that we've seen is not the one we expected. Therefore, we're going to shift or calibrate, whatever the
or change our mind.
Yeah, exactly. And actually what we're going to do is we're sending everybody back in. We're going to regain control. It's going to take another 3 months. And who knows? It's easy to talk from a distance. But so I think the courage, this isn't fixed bayonets up the hill courage. This is the courage maybe to do what we ask leaders to do all the time, which is to show their vulnerability without considering themselves to be vulnerable. And I think that the media or the people that train people in power about what their perception of media is, be strong, show, don't turn, never wrong, never apologize. So there's something demonstrably wrong there, where what I actually see with something like Afghanistan, there's a couple of things going on. Of course, there's a geopolitical set of decisions of which I understand a portion of it. There's financial decisions about, listen, how long is this thing just going to go on? At some point, etc. But then there's just that whole truth right now, which is that media frenzy. And in some respects, I think what I see going on there is, I wonder if the social media wasn't like it is, if we went back 20 years, if they just go, do you know what, just because it'd be just a newspaper headline. It wouldn't be this constant, sort of chaos. Would they be able to take a step back? Well, but they don't have the courage. They don't have the courage to do so. So I'm interested in courage.
Let's be clear about where we are in history. The media. If you go back 150 years, you go back into the 19th century.
Yeah.
How did people know what was happening in any war zone? It was newspapers.
Yep.
After that, it became telegraph, a little bit of Morse code on the telegraph. And then it became radio. So, the First World War, arguably, radio brought it home to us. But Vietnam wasn't the Second World War, but Vietnam, they say, was lost in the sitting rooms of America because television brought the war into my living room.
Yeah.
Now we have social media, and that makes it not about bulletins at 10 and at 6 in the afternoon. It's a constant stream, 24/7, never shuts off. And so the world knows what's happening, literally, maybe not quite in real time, but almost in real time. So there's an immediacy of that impact. And so scrutiny is to be expected, I think, because everybody can see what's happening. They might not have a very kind of accurate view of it, but certainly opinions and individual perceptions are shuttled around the world really fast. The thing I feel bad about is that despite all of that, most of us feel powerless to influence what's going on. What would my voice say? My voice would say, for God's sake, stay there long enough to get the people out who have a right to come out. And that for me is something I would want to say to someone, but I can shout it as loud as I like. I don't have access to people making those decisions.
The ex-Navy SEAL, very well-known character called Jocko Willink, and an absolute force of a human being. And he's all over social media doing leadership development and things like that. He's on podcasts, but he's ex-SEAL Team 6 leader, all of this. So, and he put out a video, I think it was yesterday, I'm slightly unsure of the timeline, but definitely within the last sort of 48 hours of him role-playing being the president. And it's very interesting. And what he does is he actually goes, paraphrasing, hello, everybody, right, we've made a mistake. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in. We're going to take control. We're going to do that within 48 hours. And if anybody's got a problem with that, stay out of our way. Yeah. Very forthright, and he's very clinical and blah, blah, blah. And, so he's done this thing as a kind of indicator, because he is somebody that, our podcast is here, his podcast is up there. but that root, that desire to express, I think, that to be heard for the opinion of the everyday person, I think is a frustration. And some people have an outlet. They got a big podcast, we've got a smaller podcast, but you can talk amongst your friends, you can post on social media, you can try and put something into the world like we're doing now. So I think, there are these frustrations that what do we do, and it could be when you see famine, it could be, but that reaction, that sense of powerlessness, which isn't answered by just give all your money to a some sort of charity to enable, but I think it is a sense of frustration in people in power, and it's looking at that.
And yet, I've also got the words ringing in my ear of my good friend John Richton, who is a sensational businessman, very successful man, was finance director at British Airways, went to run and turned around a huge supermarket company in Europe, and then ran Rolls-Royce for a number of years, and now sits as a non-exec director on a number of boards. He is a really very, very capable leader, and his mantra is always, leadership is hard, commentary is easy. So, and in a sense, we're playing armchair quarterback here. And trying to suggest how the game should have been played. We actually don't have to throw the ball. And so I'm very, very mindful that it's easy to do what we're doing, which is to be wise after the fact, to be wise at a distance. It's very easy. But the opinions of people like us, just ordinary folks, need to be available to those people making decisions, because if we have one thing we can do, of course, is we can use our votes wisely when it comes to the general election next time around, but that feels too small, too distant, too generic. How do they know what we're trying to give them feedback on? And I don't know of a way other than doing what we're doing, which is to sort of put opinions out there and see what kind of feedback we get and how that provokes debate. I've been trying to write some blogs about leadership over the last number of years since becoming a professor on the subject, and each time I'm trying to say, look, here's an idea that you might want to work with. But I am genuinely troubled if in trying to create a world which has certain values at the heart of it, we sacrifice them in the very action of trying to preserve them, if you see what I mean. So if you talk to the people who went into Afghanistan in the first place, they would talk about respect for human life. They would talk about giving everyone a fair chance in life in that country, about sort of trying to not just be tough on terrorism, but also tough on the causes of terrorism by trying to sort of give people a better chance in life. They'd say all of those good things. It feels like we've sacrificed almost all of them over a 4 or 5 week period in which we've said we're out and we're about to go in 48 hours from now, whatever it may be. I'm troubled by that apparent contradiction, and maybe I've got it wrong, but it looks like a contradiction.
And maybe that's something that says, when I look at leaders in a commercial context, that espousal of values, but actually the push on commercials at certain times in the ebb and flow of what's going on in an organization, where actually values get sacrificed for potentially a commercial output. So because that balance maybe goes awry, and I think that's a similar linkage. I also think what I'm really sensitive to is decisions are generally always made with, when I say that, not always, decisions are, I think, often made with good intentions. And again, I think that's a lovely, phrase. Leadership is hard, commentary is easy. 2020 hindsight's a beautiful thing. Those kind of things. And you're right. So I very much doubt anybody made the decision with the intent that this would be the output. I don't think I have an issue with decisions. I think what my anxiety, concern, awareness is the pace or the willingness to change tack and to shift and calibrate in the moment when data is indicating something's not right. And so I look, as you're right, as an armchair observer, I can look at that and go, what would stop you from going back? It's not as if you don't have the wherewithal to do it, and going, we will create a safe zone. We will have corridors of entry into, the exit points. We will, I'm sure, as somebody in a military, if I said, can you do that? They go, oh yeah, of course I can do that. Yeah, I can do it tomorrow if you like, if I'm given. So I think it's that hesitation around what stops people. Is it competence? Is it courage? Is it that changing a view and being seen to change? That's what I think.
And I think it comes. I think this comes back. I think you're hinting at a theme that we've touched on a number of times before, which is about, do we believe in single point leadership? The idea of a prime minister, the idea of a president, the idea of a chairman or whatever. It feels as if the implication is that the leadership resides in this one person, and therefore we're dependent on that one person's good judgment for making good decisions. Now, you know that I don't believe in that, and neither do you. We believe in collective leadership, incomplete leaders, but complete leadership therefore comes from incomplete leaders working effectively together. So that you've got all the complementary differences playing out against each other. And when you're making a decision like that, instead of saying, I've said we're going to be out on this date, we're going to be out on this date, and that's my view and I'm the boss. Instead, what you'd be saying is, look, I believe we need to get out on this date. What am I missing? Tell me how this could fail. If we were to conduct what my dear friend Owen Derbyshire calls a pre-mortem, what a pre-mortem? A pre-mortem is, imagine 5 years from now that people look back on the decision we've just taken today and said what a disaster it was. What will they be criticizing? Let's do that ahead of time, 5 years ahead of time. Let's do a pre-mortem now. Why would this fail? And it seems to me that I'm not seeing enough evidence of that kind of thinking. What I'm seeing is evidence of, we've made a decision, we're going to put whatever spin on it we can. We're going to have a party line. We're going to make sure everybody toes that party line. And we're going to keep defending it and defending it and defending it, which is the opposite of what you're saying, which is about being willing to have the courage to say, you know what, we might have got this one wrong and we're going to rethink it. But also, I don't think it's sound leadership either. What you need is for people to have a proper debate and show the evidence of that debate in the decisions that they take. And if it's the case that it's better to get rid of those what Biden calls the forever wars, and funnily enough, Trump had that idea as well. Let's get rid of those. That still might be a good thing, but the question is how? How?
Yeah, and this is the bit where, when I look at the people on the ground here, the interpreters, the administrators, the whoever might be at risk, even people that maybe supplied food to embassies, I have no idea what the criteria is for being, in a dangerous spot, but some of them are really obvious, and the interpreters has grabbed the headline as, listen, they're indicative of the people that have, put themselves in harm's way to enable us. Now, that's the bit where I think if it had been a debacle at a kind of military level getting out, we left a few helicopters behind. Yeah, that was a bit of a mess up. We go, hey, stuff of life. But actually what we're seeing is human beings and their family being put at risk, because it looks like, what is that? Is that then a competence issue? Is that then a values issue? Did somebody just go, hey, listen, look, we don't want the forever war. We want to get out. Okay. So listen, what are the sensitivities here? Back to your point. What am I not seeing? And at some point, did somebody just not go, the first thing we need to do is get everybody out that's going to be basically put to death if we leave.
Yes.
So we need them out first, probably quietly, and then, etc., whatever that process is. Now, as a non-expert, I'm pretty sure if you and I and half a dozen people we know sat in a room, we'd have come up with that. we'd have gone, well, let's get all the people at greatest risk out first. I reckon that would have come out first.
Well, look, let's make this more generalizable, because now we can bring it back to teams and organizations and so on, because you've talked about values now a few times. I think that the purpose of values is at least twofold, and there might be other reasons as well, but let me just mention two. One is, we are often forced to improvise because the world doesn't work the way we think it's about to work. We make a decision, we realize that some factor has flown in from left field, and now we've got to rethink on the hoof. So improvisation is a fundamental capability to be able to master in a world which is fast moving and unpredictable. Okay, it's inevitable. You'll be forced into an improvisational scenario at some point, and probably quite often. So in order for you not to have to just live off your wits and come up with any bright idea you can think of at that time, there are certain kinds of rules or guidelines that you can take with you all the time into whatever unpredictable situation you find yourself in. One is the purpose that we're trying to serve. So if I run an organization, I need to know, what is this organization about? What are we trying to achieve in the long term? And the second is, what are the values that guide us? Now, I can take those with me into any situation. So let's go back to Afghanistan for a second. The purpose was to halt terrorism in its tracks. The values that we're trying to be guided by are those liberal Western values that put a very, very high price on human life. We don't think of it cheaply. And those two factors become guidelines that we can take with us at all times into any unexpected, unpredictable, fast-moving situation. So values are not just a sort of nice to have. They become a bit like, if you're a jazz musician and you've got to improvise, you've always got the rules of harmony in your head. You know what chords are made up of which notes, and what therefore is a scale that fits in that key. You can choose to break it if you like, but you usually will come back to it, because the absence of those sorts of guidelines leave you completely floundering. So I think values and purpose, which we've not mentioned much, are fundamental in situations like this. Fast-moving, unpredictable.
And I buy into that, and I use the word craft a lot, which is this idea that as a leader, as a leadership team, we're constantly working on our skills that are the vehicle for delivering our purpose and our values and our commercial imperatives. So, just being able to run a coherent meeting or make tough decisions or whatever that or just say I'm sorry or whatever it is, that the craft in what we're doing. So yes, the purpose is key, the values are key. And then there's the craft. And if we looked at what's going on that global scale, in essence, it's a team effectiveness issue. I kind of look at that and go, because actually, if this was a corporate team, we'd look at that. And if this was, I don't know, we've had 100 retail outlets in France. We're now getting out of France for whatever reasons, and what we did was we shut them all over the weekend. And then we emailed everybody on Sunday. You did what?
Happened to have worked with an organisation that got out of Norway.
Right. Well,
a retail organisation. And what did they do? They sold their Norway business to another business.
Right. And Cineworld shut down in. Sorry. Yeah, right. And Cineworld shut down in the UK, and people were finding out about it through social media. Great, thanks. So one could argue, well, we have a purpose here to be commercially sound, and we have values here that would have all been written all over the place and in documents about, treating people with respect, because there's no company that doesn't have that in there somewhere. But when push comes to shove, actually what we did was, and so people were turning up on the Monday morning confused, and their fears of their mortgages and how am I going to pay and what. So we didn't value the human being. Now, you could say then, so where's the craft? So the purpose may have been there, the values may have been there, which is fine, but actually where's the craft, or maybe the commitment to the craft of doing these things in an appropriate way? Because what I don't see is, I imagine that per se, everybody is individually competent to a greater or lesser degree. I mean, that's a debate we could lose ourselves in. But actually, as an effective team, hey, we put this into operation at 9 o'clock. At 9:10, we realized, Houston, we have a problem. How does that team come together, have the tough conversation, say, what's our shared narrative? Okay, so we're going to have to throw ourselves on our sword here, but let's be seen to be strong about making a change, rather than, the perceived strength, but the weakness of holding to a commitment that we now realize is wrong.
Talk about commitment, and I think that's a really important word. But I'm not sure I think of commitment as to a craft. I see commitment to values. So this very morning, I was reading the newspaper, and the debate that's going on at the moment is, they didn't put it in these terms, but basically, how many human beings are we prepared to sacrifice to bring back one Chinook helicopter?
Okay.
And the way it works is, they've got a whole bunch of wide-bodied cargo planes, and they're ferrying people out at the moment in them. And we know that they can't get all the people out, but there's a big commitment not to leave useful equipment behind, like a Chinook helicopter, which costs hundreds of millions of pounds. And so the debate this morning is, at what point do we start to say, sorry, no, we're not going to take any more people out, even though you've got the right to come. We're going to take a helicopter out, another helicopter out, another helicopter. So that for me is where the rubber really hits the road. So how many people are we prepared to sacrifice for one Chinook helicopter? How many people is that worth?
So that's where, I mean, these things are not, sometimes I feel, even though we have the conversation, what's more important than your values? But I can't always put those things on a weighted balance and know exactly where they sit. But I might think, but the craft of this team, this wherever that sits, to have those conversations, the commitment to, yes, the values, but us being able to, the commitment to the craft of being able to work through those conversations at pace, because they, and I don't think I wouldn't even want to say which one comes, the cart before the horse. We could debate that one, until we come home. But I think leadership is holding a lot of truths, and still functioning. It is about, actually, have they ever been a team? If you look from, the president of the United States through to, whoever the person that's in control on the ground in Afghanistan, how connected are they? Are they chatting? Are they on the phone and going, hey, can I just speak to the president? Yeah, listen, Joe, we've got a bit of a problem here, my friend. Do they, again, who knows? But the intimacy of conversation, maybe, rather than the protocol of reporting. I wonder what's going on there.
You'd hope that the parameters for those decisions have been agreed sometime ahead of time, so that commander on the ground doesn't need to talk to the president. Instead, the intention of the operation as a whole has been made clear to everybody, so that now people on the ground day to day can make the right decisions, because they understand what we're trying to achieve and what the guiding principles are that we're to use. What I don't want to create is a bottleneck where the people have got to get through to the White House to make any kind of decision. And by the way, I don't think what I said about the Chinook helicopter, you might imply from that my view is, no human life is worth the Chinook helicopter. Well, I know things are more complex than that, because, if that Chinook helicopter can be used to kill people, then it's lives versus lives.
Blow it up.
It's a real question that has to be debated. But on how do you make it? And I'd like to feel that somehow in our society, the views of honest folks, just decent, ordinary people in the street, maybe like you and me and our friends, that somehow the sensitivities of citizens somewhere gets weighed in that equation. You know, what can I explain to you? Okay, think of it selfishly. What can I explain to my constituents, to my electorate, to the people who can keep me in power or get rid of me? On what basis am I going to make that case? And is it defensible? And I think that's a terribly important thing for us all to hold in mind.
Well, my 9-year-old, I limit what he can watch on TV because it's sensitive stuff that's on there, but he's got a sense of things. And he said, "What's going on there, Dad?" And I went, "Oof, blimey," because he's 9. I went, basically, the Americans and etc. were in a country and now they're leaving. And he went, "Oh, okay. So why are they leaving those people behind?" I thought, "Oh, flipping heckers, where do I even go with that?" But the point is, regardless of my rubbish answer that I probably gave, part of this is when you're explaining to somebody that doesn't understand the mechanics of the complexity, what sounds reasonable and what sounds just right. You know, if you're talking to somebody that hasn't got a filter or hasn't got a lens because they just haven't gone, I'm not a conservative, I'm not a liberal, I'm 9. Right? So what seems right? And at 9, we'll get people that need to be got out. That's kind of it, And when I'm working with organizations, I very often go, I understand what you're saying, but to somebody who's right down the bottom of the hierarchical food chain, how would you explain it to them in a manner that they could understand it as a way of checking you're not wrapping yourself up in your own BS?
Yeah, that's right.
I.e., if Bob in the call center or Sue in the call center doesn't get it, maybe it's not right.
There was a time, this is a slightly old commercial story, but Johnson & Johnson, if you remember, they had the problem with Tylenol. In which someone was poisoning Tylenol. So they took Tylenol off all shelves, invented a tamper-proof package and put it back again. But they took the hit on Tylenol, which was a really big product for them.
Yeah.
They took it off worldwide, said we'll forego that. And what had happened just before that was they came up with this thing called the Johnson & Johnson Credo, which was their values statement. And the chief exec went to every country in which Johnson & Johnson had a sizable presence and ran what they called Credo challenge meetings, in which I wasn't there, so I don't know, but reportedly what happened is they sort of say, this is the Credo, this is what we believe in.
Yep.
Now, does anyone want to suggest to me ways that we're not living up to this? So you can challenge it. Do we mean it or don't we? Now again, I wasn't there, I don't know. But that idea I like, because what it says is, I'm prepared not only to declare what our values are, but I'm prepared also to be challenged by our behavior. Because if our behavior doesn't reflect those values, then the piece of paper is worth no more than the piece of paper. But if we're prepared to take a hit from time to time, to show that we really do live these values, then you can trust them. You can believe in them. And I found that uplifting until I then discovered, apparently, that some critics said, but they also knew that Johnson & Johnson baby oil was being used as a sun tanning aid at the time, and they didn't take that off the shelves. So of course there are two sides to every argument, but this is a number of years ago. But the core idea I really like, which is these are our values and I'm prepared to be challenged according to them. And I wonder exactly how the decisions that are being taken at the moment internationally stack up if you were to go into that kind of values challenge setting. And of course, the truth is, there is no mechanism for doing that for nations. Even the United Nations has the floor of the Security Council, which has to be unanimous, and therefore people can block any inconvenient conclusion there. But the ballot box is one of those values challenge opportunities. But what I think happens in our country, at least, is that people vote according to historical patterns. You know, my dad's a Labour man and I'm a Labour man too, you know, and my granddad was, you know, all of that. Now, yes, in the last election, we began to see some shifting of that, but I would love to encourage us as citizens to think uniquely for each election. Who's standing? What do they stand for? What are they proclaiming? And then when I see what they do in power, the next time it comes around, I'm going to hold them accountable.
And there's a big thing here about people's, I wouldn't say capability, because people can pretty well do anything they want to if they're interested. But I think this is something about the quality of leadership that we see that would indicate to me that people are disconnected from politics in the sense of, is this the best we've got to offer? Because when I see the commentary and I see people in positional power, particularly in the politic arena, what I actually see is staged responses. They're generically true. They're ambiguous. They're artfully vague. They're manufactured. It's so rare to see somebody actually just talk openly. It's because that fear of the soundbite, the written word, not contextualizing the entire argument. So I think what I see is a lot of fear. They wouldn't say they're fearful. They would say they're navigating the social climate, or they'll use some, vocabulary that says that they're being artful because they've been, they have people to help them do that. But I think
they're skilled rhetoricians. They use rhetoric to persuade, and they're trained, to answer difficult media questions by not answering difficult media questions at all.
And so when we look at the I think it's the Edelman Trust survey, the annual, it's been the lowest levels of trust for the last 2 or 3 years in all aspects, from charities to the church to commercial organizations through to whatever it might be. And it's not that people have a lack of trust with, in essence, the organization or the concept of it. It's just that they have a lack of trust in the people leading them. Because what we're seeing is actually there's something about people in positions of positional power that doesn't inherently fill us with a sense of belief that they are operating from a place of clear purpose that is then backed up with their values, which is then driven by their commitment to their competence. Whichever order we want to put that in, not too bothered. But the reality is, I think we look upwards and I think we are disappointed. And I think this is indicative of that.
I think that's right. But I'm the conclusion I come to is that however small an action any one of us can take, we should take it. So, for example, if we look at a major corporation and lament the fact that they don't pay enough tax in this country, don't buy from them. It's a small decision, but just don't do it. My wife and I are trying to be much more specific about where we buy things online from, because we just want to encourage certain businesses more than others. So rather than just go blindly to just any kind of generic search, which typically throws up, the big boys, the Amazons of this world. We yesterday wanted to buy a pair of kitchen scissors. Big purchase. We're last of the big spenders. But what we did was we thought, which local shops might well have an online presence and sell kitchen scissors, because we'd like to support them rather than just sort of do the easy thing, put one entry in and buy kitchen scissors, very perfectly easily. But the point is that my belief is that we're not completely powerless. We can only take each of us can only take these small decisions. But if collectively as a society, we get into that idea that I can take a small decision, but many of us, millions of us adding those small decisions together actually can create big pressure, then I believe we should be trying to do that.
And this is where making judgments on other people's values and then actually looking to oneself and saying, what are we actively doing? So, okay, so yeah, we look at a certain situation and go, okay, so what are you going to do about it? Do you vote? Yes. And do you know why you vote if you vote? Are you voting because the character seems agreeable? Or are you agreeing because you understand? Are you voting because you understand the politic? Are you taking into a why? And actually, I would say if we take, I don't know how many people in the UK right now, let's say 70 odd million, however many that is, and those that can vote, and we went round and said, why don't you vote? Is it that, well, I am so disconnected from them that I don't? Which actually, maybe it should be, yes, but maybe you should be so connected with your desire to send a message and to have an impact that you should. And so there is a kind of a disconnection that I think allows incompetence to thrive, because the populace are not verbalizing an opinion in a regularly coherent manner. So that, I think, we then become the engineer of our own demise, because we're so disconnected we don't bother, which means incompetence can continue because the majority say, do you know what, I'm just trying to live my own life and get through the week, my friend.
Yeah, that's right. I fully understand that it's very nice for you and I we can pontificate about these things because we're in a very comfortable position. We've got enough food, we've got a nice place to live and all of that sort of stuff, and we have a very easy life. But I do think there are three things that all of us can do. We can vote and place our vote with care. We can choose where and how we spend our money, and in other words, who we're going to give our business to. And the third thing we can do is we can talk to people. So if people express opinions that we don't agree with, we don't have to get aggressive about it, but we can at least put the counter view. And these are three things that it seems to me all of us can do as citizens, certainly adult citizens, that we are not powerless. However powerless we may feel, those three things can be done. And in businesses, may I say, we're not powerless again, because it does feel to me that the culture of an organization is simply the kind of aggregate of the values and practices that you see throughout the organization. So if I want to try to have an influence, I can influence the people I work with. And we can sort of start to create these little pools of these little islands of alternative thinking. And it's not disrespectful to do that if you're committed to the same purpose and values of the organization as a whole. But that it does require us to not to go down the road of least effort. We do have to think a little bit about the political issues, the commercial issues, and the debates that we're prepared to enter into. But we can at least do something.
So there is something about being connected to the world that you live in. There is something about having a connection to, you could say the environment, political, whatever, as much as ecological, but there's something here about that. It's easy to disconnect from an organization. I see people disconnect from relationships, from families, etc. Because why? Well, because it's the easy option. It's less painful. It's a safeguard. And if I'm not a political person per se, but I've noticed just in the wanting to have a conversation with certain people, some are like, yeah, I'm not really into the politic, but this has woken me up a little bit. I'm paying attention to it. Yes, we can have a conversation. Of course, you've got some that are all over it. And then there's a majority that go, oh, I just can't, I haven't got the energy to talk about it. It just upsets me, or it's just not, I just don't want it in my brain, or I can't really comment because the complexities of why it's like that are too much for me. And I'm almost like, yeah, but you know what? I don't think you even need to understand how it happened. There's something about understanding is what's happening, correct, regardless of how it got there. Oh, guys, too much. I've got too much on my plate with picking the kids up and this, that, and the other. And there's a lot of people that just haven't got the wherewithal or the headspace for it. And whatever, be it in an organization, be it I'll just do my job. Look, let the big boys sort it out. As long as I'm getting paid, I'll do a good job at a local level, whatever.
Yeah, enough.
It's a safeguard.
And it's full.
Yeah.
But the other bit, though, I think, is that we have to be willing also to explore alternative points of view.
Yes.
I often talk to people about sort of what newspaper they read, if they read them at all. And some will say, oh, I read the Times, and some of our friends say, oh God, I don't read that. I'm not a conservative. I read the Guardian. I read the Guardian.
Which tribe are you in, right?
Exactly. But what that does is, I read both because I'm trying at least to sort of live the value that says I want to understand both sides of the debate.
Yeah,
and that may not be a very big range, the Times and Guardian, but I think it's some sense of alternative. But it's because I've got ringing in my ears now an absolutely wonderfully elegant phrase that came from Jonathan Sacks's book on morality. He said that the problem, and it's this echo chamber idea, that social media, we're constantly reinforcing the views we already have. What we want is people to tell us the same things that we believe. But he had this wonderful term. He said these days we live in disconnected islands of the like-minded. Disconnected islands of the like-minded. And I was thinking, gosh, that's an elegant phrase, but also, my goodness, that's dangerous, isn't it? Because it means that you come to believe that your view of the world is the only sensible view of the world, and there is no sensible alternative. So if we're going to place our vote with care, spend our money with care, and engage in debate when we get the chance to do so, we can't afford to live in disconnected islands of the like-minded. We need to understand the arguments more broadly than that. We need at least to be able to see both sides of it. And I do believe that that's a really rather important aspect of what it is to be a human being as well. And
I kind of think it's always been like that. I think depending if you were in service, you had that, if you're the one that owned the estate, if you were the one that was in Parliament, or, whatever it is, these are all islands that are disconnected from the other realities. So I get that, and I do buy into it. I also think that this social media has allowed us to, I don't reference my book very often, but I just wrote that, back in the day, the Vikings used to invade and, they'd destroy your village, take your children and raise them as their own. It's always been bonkers, right? The only difference is now if they landed, there'd be somebody with their camera live streaming it as people came onto the beach, and you'd hear about it instantly while you sat on the loo in Chesterfield. So there's a closeness to it. But I think at first we were like, wow. But then, of course, what happens is you get used to it. You get familiar with it. You desensitize to it. I remember when the Michael Jackson Thriller video was put out after 12 o'clock because it was considered to be too scary. I mean, now we look at it like a comedy video. We adjust, and our ability to watch things and see things and have them go. So there is this need to not give up your, I don't want to say energy, but to give up your sensitivity, your calibration, your sense of right and wrong, and to have a reaction to it and to not forsake it, I think, and end up by placing yourself in a kind of semi-submissive space. And that's when I think as individuals or teams or communities, we lose our resilience, because we may be angry, but it's then an internalized anger, and it's not going into something positive.
Yeah. So in a sense, what we've done,
go and do something.
What we've done in this conversation is, I reflect on it now, and it maybe suggests that we should stop. But we started with, we're troubled by a number of things that are happening on the international stage at the moment. It seems to offend our values, but it also seems to offend against the principles of good leadership and of trust. What we've ended up with is, I'm not powerless. There are things I can do. They're small, but if enough of us do these things,
yes,
the impact can be significant.
Yes, and I think that is it is a good place to come to a stop. And it's also, I think, something that says, call it lethargy, call it disconnection, call it whatever we want. The biggest danger, I think, to an individual, a team, a culture, a country, whatever, a world, is what I would almost call I almost want to use the word ambivalence, but it's not really. It's not that people are ambivalent. They have the reaction, but their action is one of ambivalence. They then don't do something with it. And I think that's the danger, when you feel the anxiety, but it manifests in a kind of passivity. And that's when it all goes horribly wrong anywhere. If I'm in a one-to-one relationship with somebody, we all know people that are together that probably shouldn't be, because they're having an anxiety with each other, but nobody's breaking the cycle because it's easier not to. Our financials are wrapped up and, oh God, so we'll just stay together for 30 years. That's the same thing. I work for an employee. Yeah, but where else would I work? I've been here for 25 years. Okay, so I'm having the reaction, but what am I going to do about it? Probably nothing. It's when that happens that I think that's the danger zone that I think I can see anywhere as being a problem.
Yes, I think that does sound right, because in a sense what you're saying is, there's no point lamenting unless you're prepared to do something about it.
Yeah,
however small it may be.
Yeah, do something. Yeah, okay. So on that note, we've solved all world issues, and the answer to all problems in the world is do something, which actually isn't probably far wrong to a greater or lesser degree. So on that level of wondrousness from ourselves, great to connect again. I'll press the stop button, we'll chat, and I'll see you on the next one.
Good enough.
That was The Professor and the Coach. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please tell others and subscribe so you don't miss out on further episodes. Hope to see you soon. You can connect with Guy at livingbrave.com and David at pendletonking.com.